smokes, I'm no joke out the bullpen. Bringing nothing but heat, leave you hanging like clothespins. He's a beast when he goes in, ice cold frozen. The first round draft pick, number one chosen. Drop bombs, explosion, self-promotion. And I keep shit moving like a flanker in motion. I'm the number one spokesman, it's my devotion. That I'm dedicated to the rhyme is my own notion. Brown water's the potion, it put hair on your chest. Or you can put one in the air and it'll put you to rest. Sweet dreams, I'm about to fade. I got my mind on my money and I'm dreaming about getting this all paid. Mr. Go-Getter, Mr. Assertive, Mr. Initiative, Mr. Results, man, I'm all about my business, kid. Damn.
On a suddenly not so casual Sunday morning in September, it is NFL Week 3, Sunday, September 24th. Circa Millions, the show, the shark, the gun, the odds fellow, live right now on YouTube, Shark and Waters Nation. Please click and subscribe so we can chat with you. It's our only point to chat. And of course, on Twitter, now known as X. A beautiful Sunday it is, Week 3, Guns Picks. What's going on this morning, my brother?
Man, going into Week 3, I'm having a great NFL season so far. 7-2-1 in the Circa, 11-4. Actually, I 12-4-1 overall with all the picks that have been rolling in for the NFL. Listen, I'm going to carry this over to Week 3. Absolutely dominating the board. We got the odds fellow back. What's going on, my friends? How you doing?
Great to be back after a little hiatus. Survived that Vegas trip. Had a great time at Circa. Shout out to those guys for taking care of me. I figured out how to get through the security Wi-Fi firewall, of course, after the show ended. But here we are, Week 3. We're back. Glad to be with the guys.
Absolutely. We appreciate you guys joining us. We know there are about 10,000 different NFL shows. We love the NFL. It is by far the most difficult to handicap. A lot of disagreement on this week's card. I think for good reason. The conversation is going to be ripe and ready, and we're not waiting around on a suddenly not so casual, sharp Sunday, September 24th, 2023. Guns Picks, U.S. Bank Stadium, 1 o'clock. Vikings at home. This team is confounding, confusing, and your first official of the broadcast.
Yeah, this is going to be a pick for the Circa. It's -1 at the Circa right now, but I went and got it at a pick'em. I think there are still shops out there that have it at this, but we're going Minnesota on this one. Listen, they're 0-2 to start the season. Last week, losing a heartbreaker on Thursday night, 34-28 to the NFC champion Philadelphia Eagles, -56 net yards per the game and -3 turnover ratio. They have fumble problems big time with this Minnesota team, but I think they get right in this spot here. Listen, look at the Chargers on this one. They're on the second leg of a back-to-back road trip, losing to Tennessee in OT in dramatic fashion, 27-24, dead even in the net yards on this one. Minnesota, very one-dimensional right now. They actually had to go and get some free agency at Cam Akers from the Rams to go help with their run game. They're only averaging 35 yards per game, 2.7 yards per carry. And if you look at them in the passing game, however, very good numbers on this one, 72.7% pass completion rate, 337 yards per game, and 8 yards per attempt for Kirk Cousins. 6 touchdowns, only 1 INT for him. So it's not, they're getting beat on the turnover ratio, but it's not coming from Kirk Cousins throwing the ball. They got to look at the Chargers defense. They struggled the past 2 weeks, especially stopping the pass. They give up 456 yards passing to Miami, 200 to Tennessee. Tannehill, though, in that game was 20 for 24, 83% pass completion rate. This is more of a balanced offense for the Tennessee Titans. That's why you're seeing low numbers there in the passing game. But Minnesota, I think, is going to be able to carve up this Charger team today. Minnesota, in theory, if you actually look at the numbers, you break them down by the statistical analytics of it, you would think that Minnesota should be a 2-0 team, but the turnovers are what's killing them. They're -6 turnover ratio for the year, where you look at the Chargers, they continue to struggle finishing games. Minnesota is 4-0 straight up versus AFC opponents last season, and I think they proved themselves out here, getting away from the NFC opponents, getting into the AFC opponents, and they are going to rock it here in U.S. Bank. Give me Minnesota. I got it at a pick'em, but also with the Circa -1.
Yeah, and jumping off it, first disagreement of the broadcast. There will be many. I am officially on the Chargers overnight at +1.5. That line was available on DraftKings at about 2 in the morning. I believe there might be a 1.5 there now, or it might be getting steamed down. And as Guns mentioned, a lot going on here, and I think a very interesting conversation, because I know for one thing, the gun doesn't really like Minnesota. So I'm a little surprised on that. And you guys know I don't like Minnesota at all. And when I first started handicapping this card, one of the first things that I went down game to game before I went into the layered analysis of each game itself, I went down and I just looked at each team's ATS statistics in the small window to see who I thought was a buy and who I thought was a sell. And the first one that really came to mind was the Chargers. The Chargers are 0-2 straight up. They're 0-2 ATS. It doesn't get any worse than that statistically. But if you look at both games, late lead against Miami, this is a Miami playoff team. This is a Miami team that theoretically really is high quality. That's no problem there at all. And last week on the road in a really difficult spot at Tennessee, up in the fourth quarter, late touchdown by Tennessee, 2:22 to go. So 2 final drive melts for the Chargers. And you go to the other side of this, Minnesota actually is 1-1 ATS. They did backdoor cover the Eagles on prime time in week 2. So statistically speaking, Minnesota ran hot all of last year, and they ran hot again in week 2. So again, this is not Chargers or Vikings. This is pure statistics. Minnesota is still supposed to get worse statistically. And you go through their out-of-division stuff, as Guns mentioned, they have not performed well in this spot really at all, dating back to the end of last year. One noteworthy game against the AFC at home, down 33-0 to the Colts. And the Chargers last year, if you really go through their schedule, this team performed great on the road outside of the division. They were 5-1 straight up last year on the road outside of the division, and their only loss was in week 10, November 13th, 2022, at San Francisco. That's arguably the best team in the sport right now. So if they're not playing one of the best teams, they're 5-0 in this spot. This is where you want to buy statistically the Chargers and fade the Vikings. And one final point. I did not get behind this coach Staley last year at all. I thought he was a little lackluster. I didn't really like his psychology. It changed for me last week. In the press conference, the media asked him if his team was having a hangover from the backdoor loss at Jacksonville in the playoffs last year. First time I've ever seen this guy really stand up to anybody. And if you're going to stand up to the media, that means you've got one thing: personal confidence. And he really laid down the law with these guys. He said, absolutely not. There's no hangover here. That was last year. We're in the present. This is 2023. We played 2 very good football teams in very difficult spots, and we lost 1 possession games late. First time I've ever seen this guy take control, and I like that for this locker room. I think they're going to be pissed off today and turned up. Unofficially, Chargers plus 1.5. Odds fella, welcome to the broadcast. Top play, Cleveland, Ohio, 1 p.m., Cleveland Browns Stadium. Off a loss, an egregious one at that. Your first official of the broadcast.
Good to be tapped in here. Happy Sunday. Happy September 24th. The fall weather is in the air, and that fall weather is what I like here for this Cleveland team and this Cleveland defense. Now, look, throw last week out the window. I think, like Shark just said, it was a tough loss, but much like in week 1, Cleveland has owned Joe Burrow and the Bengals lately. The Pittsburgh Steelers and that division game, for whatever reason, have owned the Browns 3-7 over their last 5 years. So throw that thing out of here. And I know Shark's going to get into this a little bit too, so I don't want to repeat too much, but the big thing is, despite my love for Mike Vrabel and everything he's built infrastructure-wise in Tennessee, probably the most successful Belichick disciple. Maybe we can get Guns to weigh in on that later. From a coaching tree standpoint, I think the Cleveland defense is just too good. Even with the Nick Chubb injury, I think they'll do enough on the ground to get it done, because I'm really pointing to the defense here, right? That defense ranks 2nd overall in DVOA, and they've only given up 1 offensive touchdown. That offensive touchdown that they gave up through the first 2 weeks of the year was also a play that pushed it over 200 yards of offense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Otherwise, they also would have had 2 games where they held and pitched 2 efforts, keeping opponents under 200 yards on offense, which, is completely crazy to me. So the big stat here, one that I know Shark will not touch on a little bit differently, so just to come at it from a different angle. Tannehill threw 3 interceptions in that week 1 game, and the offensive line allowed 3 sacks against the New Orleans Saints. They cleaned it up a little bit on the turnover battle against the Chargers, but they still allowed 5 sacks. Now you get Cleveland, who's 6th in pass rush win rate, an ESPN stat that I liked looking at last year. That means they're winning at about 52% of the time at the line of scrimmage, pressuring the quarterback. The Chargers, who had 5 sacks, were 51%, coming in at 7th. New Orleans, who had 3 sacks, was 28%, all the way at 32nd. So I think you're going to get another big time sack performance, even if they're not turning the ball over. The left guard, the rookie Peter Skoronski, is out for the Titans. So that's another kind of chink in that armor there that could have allow them to struggle. So overall, I lean under. I'm on the full game, which Shark is going to get into. And when I really looked at it too, the line strength on the first half to me was really telling. -2.5 on a 3 or 3.5 game. I think the Titans are going to have trouble scoring, and I love being under a field goal in that first half. I still think at -3, which was floating around earlier today on FanDuel or DraftKings, one of the books. I think it's a great spot for the Browns.
Yeah. And official play for me, Cleveland -3 game. As Anthony mentioned, this is just another statistical spot. As I described in the first game, you want to be buying an 0-2 Chargers. What you want to be fading here is a 2-0 Tennessee team who also backdoored both late. And again, this is a statistical fade. And if you go back to week 1, as Anthony mentioned, Tennessee was not very good at New Orleans. I believe they only had 9 points through 3 quarters, got 2 late field goals to backdoor the spread. But this is analytics football in 2023. New Orleans could have scored a touchdown on the final drive. They needed out at like the 10-yard line. So they could have covered 3. Was it the 3-yard line? Something like that?
Yeah, and then they kicked the field goal. They kicked the awkward field goal, which kind of gave them the cover, right? They probably wouldn't have even covered in a normal spot.
Oh, yeah. No, I was saying New Orleans drove down and could have scored a touchdown themselves. So the whole thing. So again, this is the fascination and the deep intrigue of capping sports is that a lot of times it's really not so much professional football or the rosters or the names of the jersey. We're actually looking at robotic guys' statistical dispersions. And Tennessee to be 2-0 ATS running a clean sheet, both back doors, largely could have probably gone 0-2 in those games. And crucial point on that, they were outgained at New Orleans, 351 to 285. And as I mentioned against the Chargers last week, they were down in the fourth quarter, got a touchdown to take the lead at the 2:22 mark of the fourth quarter. Go to the Cleveland side of this game. We had Cleveland on Monday Night Football. Cleveland did lose the game, but I think, again, you have to zoom into the matchup and say why. First of all, that was a huge buy spot emotionally for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh had gotten absolutely blown out in week 1 against San Francisco. They had to bounce back. Guns Picks had it correctly. He wasn't wrong about the emotional capacity of that stadium, Acrisure Field, on a Monday Night Football. And if you really look at that, I think the emotion is what pulled them to the victory. Because truthfully, the defense played so far beyond what the defense is going to be doing long term. And what I mean by that is they're not going to average 2 defensive touchdowns a game this year. And that is precisely why they covered that spread. Cleveland outgained them in that game uncannily, 408 yards to only 255. Cleveland has outgained their opponents this year, dating back to a blowout in week 1 against Cincinnati, 758 to 397. That's almost a 2-to-1 gap. And in professional football, that's unheard of. So this is a team with a stout defense. They will be pissed off. They are a bye team. Final point on this game. I know people like to look ahead. I do too. One counter might be next week they get Baltimore. Crucial point there. I went back to last year. That matchup is actually a revenge game for Baltimore. Cleveland got them last time. Takes the edge off a little bit for Cleveland. Cleveland will be focused and ready to go here at 1 o'clock, unofficially at -3, and the odds on the first half as well. Next play, Guns Picks. New Orleans Saints on the road at Lambeau. Jordan Love, first home start of his career, off 2 impressive ones on the road. We both suspect an environmental reversal might reverse his fortunes. You like the road team at +2 official.
Yeah, I don't like this is my top play this week. I love New Orleans all day long in this one. We actually look at Green Bay and you look at the scores of those games. It doesn't really tell the whole story until you open up the box scores and see really. I don't think they've been really demolishing any team from a yardage perspective. When you look at Green Bay coming off that close loss last week, like I was telling you, Atlanta 25-24. They did have a double-digit lead at one point in that game. Atlanta did come back and win that game. But the yardage battle, they got absolutely demolished. -222 net yards in that game for Green Bay. Now you look at New Orleans on the other side, coming off a Monday Night Football win. Kind of look boring, kind of look gross. They did win the game though, 20-17. They crushed them in the yardage battle though, plus 102 net yards, and the defense played absolutely fantastic versus Bryce Young. But when you look at Green Bay, 1-1 for the season, 1-point loss last week, and then they had an 18-point win versus Chicago. So I went back and looked at the Chicago game because that was the game where the public perception was, holy, Jordan Love's great. The Green Bay's back. They don't need Aaron Rodgers kind of perception, right? They were only plus 18 net yards in that game. So that just tells me they played very much even to the Chicago Bears. But, turnovers and, stuff that's going on with Chicago altogether just, predicated them to get a double-digit loss. All of New Orleans wins have been by 3 points or less. They did win the yardage battle in all of those games, and they have a plus 84 net yard average. So really, I think you're looking at a better team than Green Bay with New Orleans. New Orleans, great defense also. Holding opponents to 262 yards per game, 56.7% pass completion rate. And they also get to the quarterback very well. They have a 10.4% sack rate. Green Bay's offense has been putting up strong numbers, 277 yards per game of total offense, 3.3 yards per carry on the run. Jordan Love has only completed 55.8% of his passes so far, too. So really, I don't think Jordan Love is the guy. I just think he's just serviceable at best on this one. Plus, you just got to look at how Green Bay does the NFC South. They don't really play well against them, and especially against New Orleans. Last 4 matchups versus New Orleans, 3-1 against the spread. New Orleans is, and straight up in the last 4 meetings versus Green Bay. And then you have Green Bay. I love this statistic here, and I got this from Cal Sports from Wager Talk on this one. So you have team coming off a back-to-back road stretch to start the year. Then they go in their first home game in week 3. Historically, dating back to 2005, those teams cover 32.7% of the time. So if you love the trends, that is a really good one, and it's got a good sample size as well. So I'm going to be taking New Orleans on this one with all those points. So give me them. I got them at +2. I think it's +1, +1.5. It may be sinking down from there, but also just take them on the money line at that point because you just get more value out of it. But I love New Orleans today.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'll throw you Atlanta in a second, but I agree. And, when you look at this goes back to the data dispersion that I've been focusing on in this broadcast. But if you really look at Green Bay comes in here off a backdoor push at 1 or a cover if you got the final line last week. So Green Bay, for most people, is actually 2-0 ATS. Crucial point, on the road, Justin Fields and Desmond Ridder, 2 young quarterbacks. Now you come back home. First of all, total environmental shift. You're good as a road dog. The polar opposite is a home favorite. So in terms of your functionality, oftentimes you do flip completely. And you look at the other side, New Orleans, somehow 0-1-1 ATS. We had them Monday night. It was really a pretty nasty melt. They were in complete control of that game. Carolina had moved the ball barely at all and then got not only 6, but got 8 points on the final possession to push. Sometimes you're really just at the back end of some brutal variance in football, these garbage drives that are meaningless to the outcome. So New Orleans is 0-1-1 ATS, but they were in control of both games. I do lean here with the gun. New Orleans with some significance here on this Sunday. Jumping off into the next play, we got a lot to talk about on this one. 1 o'clock Fox Sports. Detroit, Michigan, Ford Field. Falcons on the road. Aforementioned Desmond Ridder, 2-0 as a starter. Anthony Latino continuing to buy the product.
Bye. Ritter, Vayner Sports, got to give the shout every time. But yeah, +3. The odds are all over the place. So you might be able to get something as low as even up to like a -105, -110. So shop around a little bit there. I haven't seen if the line moved yet. This is a tough one, and we're going to get into it a lot. I do like Atlanta, and this is the sexy Detroit Lions team that we had a lot of preseason hype about. And I actually like both these teams because generally I think they're undervalued by the public, maybe in some, good spots numerically because of what Vegas does, again, because of what those bettors are doing out in the market. But in this case, I think getting the points in what should be a field goal game to me or less, especially if it ticks above a field game, is a great spot. Now, you had Detroit coming out the gate hot. They got the test done, and there's, a Super Bowl. All the spotlight was on them Thursday Night Football to open it up. And then they laid kind of a dud. They stayed in it against Seattle at home. That could prove to be a little bit of a bounce back spot. And maybe the numbers that Shark's going to get into a little bit support that. But for me, I think the injuries are just too much. They now have a starting left tackle and right guard that are out. As of this morning, David Montgomery was doubtful. Amon St. Brown and Josh Reynolds, their two top wide receivers, were both questionable. And obviously, C.J. Gardner-Johnson is not even on that injury report because he's out indefinitely with some of the surgery coming out of the Seattle loss. So that's their top corner. So you're getting it mostly on the offensive side of the ball there. And from a defensive side of the ball, losing Gardner does not help. From a DVOA and stats perspective, both these teams are actually pretty even. But for me, if you look at the game script, I think what you're going to get is just a Detroit team that is not going to be able to stop that Atlanta rushing attack. Atlanta is going to be able to control the ball. Last year, if you zoom out, Detroit gave up 146.5 rushing yards per game. Now, this year, that's improved. They're sitting at 9th overall in the league at only 86 yards per game. But to me, that's more of an element of who they've played. Very opponent driven, right? KC comes in 23rd at 22.5 attempts per game. Seattle's only at 21.5 attempts per game, which is 29th. So 23rd and 29th ranked offensive teams this year in terms of wanting to run the ball and establish that attack, while Atlanta is sitting there at 35.5. That's a massive uptick in attempts to kick them into the 4th spot there. So I think Atlanta is going to be able to run. I think they're going to be able to control the Ritter narrative, even in a tougher environment, and just keep this game field goal or less. Maybe a sprinkle on the money line for me. I think Atlanta's for real.
I agree with that one too. I mean, when I got it at +3.5, I know the line is like 3.
That's a great,
If
you can get over if it's going to tick back up. That's a
yeah.
great
I mean, I saw some this morning. You got to go look for them. They're out there, but I mean, most of the numbers you're going to see right now are the 3s. It may even drop further than that. I think this is an Atlanta play all day long on this one. Anthony brought up some good points. The injury problems with Detroit are going to be an issue, but I'll get to that in a second. But you look at Detroit coming off that loss last week, 37-31, plus 25 net yards for the game. Over 800 yards of total offense was in that game versus Seattle. Unbelievable, exciting offense in this one. But Detroit was -3 in turnover ratio, deciding factor in that game. And then you have Atlanta, just a great comeback last week versus Green Bay. I talked about it when we were talking about the New Orleans bet on that one. But they had plus 222 net yards in that game. This will be Atlanta's first road game of the season after playing back-to-back home games. Atlanta, good running team. Anthony alluded to it. 4.8 yards per carry. They're very sneaky good in the passing game, though. If you actually look at Ritter's numbers, 68% pass completion rate, 7 yards per attempt. He put up 235 yards last week, so he's improving week to week. He's got the weapons. He's got Kyle Pitts. He's got Drake London. He's got some guys that can really get to the ball to it. And don't forget about Bijan Robinson. You get him out into the flat, you can get the ball to him, and he is absolutely elusive himself. But you look at the Detroit passing defense, very suspect. They gave up 311 passing yards last week to Seattle and 269 yards per game already this season. They also do not put pressure on the quarterback. They only have 1 sack this year, which is kind of alarming because you think that that Detroit line, you would think that's probably their strength. It's really not their strength this year. They're actually giving the quarterback time in the pocket to make decisions through the pass. But you alluded to the injury problems, right? Dave Montgomery not going to be playing in this one. Amon St. Brown's got turf toe, so that is a lingering injury even if he plays. And then of course Taylor Decker and Vaitai not going to be playing in this game. Key linemen for them too. Those are their top linemen. And then Kirby Joseph, full safety, their safety, strong safety, not going to be playing in this game as well. So they're already injury prone so early in the season. I don't know how they recover from all those key injury points. Two teams met. When these two teams meet, 1-5 straight up and against the spread, the home team is good at Detroit. And so I'm taking advantage of the public perception of the Lions right now. Listen, they're a public favorite. They're a public darling. They were a public darling late in the season. They had hard knocks. They love the coach. They love the players. They love everything about this team. However, I think people are sleeping on this Atlanta team right now, and we got to get that value while we can. I think this is a team that has the position right now to be a playoff team. They're looking really good defensively and offensively, both sides of the ball. And I know a lot of sharp people that took the over on their win total. And I wish I jumped on that myself because looking at this team right now, they are super, super talented. And I love Atlanta in this one. Give me them at 3.5. That's the line I got. And for the Circa, I got them at +3.
Yeah, a lot to unpack here. We rarely have a three-way disagreement here, but I got to say, guys, I disagree. And I think a lot of what you're looking at statistically is very much centered on the opponents in weeks 1 and 2. And this is what I said about Tennessee and the Chargers, but this is now centered on Atlanta. Atlanta comes in here 2-0 straight up, 1-1 ATS. Who did they beat? Bryce Young and Jordan Love, both at home. This couldn't be any further from a first-year quarterback at home. And you start to really go through the schedule spot for Atlanta. In my opinion, this is absolutely brutal. 2 home wins in a row. Now you got to go to Detroit for a game, an angry Detroit team off a loss, and then you go straight to London for a game against Jacksonville next week. This is a dead zone calendar spot for a team who, in my opinion, is too hot small window. And I agree with Guns. I had done a video in the middle of the summer suggesting I thought Atlanta was the best team in the NFC South. And I still think they are, but I just don't think it comes this week. And you look at the Detroit side of this game, as you guys mentioned, Detroit did give up 37 points last week and lose to Seattle. But this is where it gets really interesting. As Guns mentioned, they got hot last year, but we talk about this in college football all the time. When a program is horrendous for 5 to 10 years, maybe even 20 or 30 in the Lions case, when they get hot for 6 games, they're not supposed to go back down to trash. They're just on a continuous upward movement point. And this is what books are saying as well. Books had not had this team favored at home until last year. And they did have them favored 6 times now in the last year. And here's where it gets really interesting. They are 4-2 at home as a home favorite. Their only 2 non-covers were both against Seattle. So Seattle, just for whatever reason, schematically owns this team. Both high-scoring losses. Last week, 37-31 in overtime. Last year, 48-45. If it's not Seattle and it's out of the division, it's hammer time. 36-27 against Washington, 40-14 against Jacksonville. Go inside of the division. They did cover a bunch of games as a dog. This is as a favorite specifically. In the division, 34-23 against Minnesota and a blowout against Chicago. This is where they performed great. Final point of this game, I want to talk about Desmond Ridder. You talk about robotic. It doesn't get much better than this. This guy in his career, let's go through this. He's had 6 starts in his career. He's had 2 home divisional starts. Last year against Tampa Bay in Week 18, a cover 30-17. Crucial point, flat in the first half, 20-0 blowout second half. Week 1 this year against Carolina, 24-10 win. Very similar margin and score. 17-3 second half, flat first half. At home outside of the division, 1-point win last week against Green Bay. Only other out of division home spot last year. Again, robotic, 1-point outright win. Go on the road, 0-2 straight up, covered in the division, backdoor against New Orleans. And I think ultra-specific spot, Week 16, 2002 at Baltimore. You guys want to talk about injuries? Baltimore didn't have Lamar Jackson in that game and still covered the spread, 17-9. Desmond Ridder and company are 0-6 in the first half career. They don't come out with any juice. Detroit is 6-0 in the first half in their last 6 home games. I do think St. Brown and Langford or Reynolds will play, excuse me. I think that's just injury stuff. I got to be honest with you guys. All boxes checked. Terrible spot for Atlanta. Detroit -3, 1 unit official. And keeping it moving here in the 1 o'clock slate, Denver Broncos on the road in Miami. This game is very interesting, and I'm excited to talk about it here 29 minutes in this beautiful Sunday morning. Sharky Waters Nation, 9 words of lifestyle. Ride the way we got in the water. Guns picks. When I looked at this game, I thought to myself, I have no idea. I'll throw it to you. You have an idea.
Yeah, I think I'm basically taking advantage of the overflated enthusiasm of the Miami Dolphins. Listen, they're coming off a back-to-back road trip. I mentioned the stat. This kind of falls into the same realm. 32.7% completion if on your first home game in Week 3 after a back-to-back. They're winning the games. Listen, they went to the Chargers. They won in dramatic fashion in that one. Late touchdown, got over there. New England kind of dominated that game from left to right. New England making their mistakes per usual to give Miami the victory. Denver coming off back-to-back home stretch, losing both games, close games too, to the Raiders, losing to Washington. Late Hail Mary against Washington, could have tied the game, had to go for 2, missed the 2-point conversion. That was the end of the game, plus 5 yards in that game. Last year, what was the biggest issue with Detroit? They struggled on the offensive end, right? This season, not so much. I think Russell Wilson's coming into his own week to week. 68.2% pass completion rate so far this season, 7.3 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, only 1 INT in the passing game. So he may be coming to his own. He may be getting a little bit more comfortable in the offense. So I think at least from a scoring standpoint, they should be able to stay with Miami to a certain extent. Miami's defense does allow high efficiency for their quarterbacks. They allowed 72% pass completion rate to their opponents so far this season in 2 games. And then Miami is kind of in a weird sandwich spot, too. If you actually look at the schedule, they're going to play Denver, non-conference game. They're playing at home. But next week, they got a road test versus Buffalo. They're coming off a road test last week in primetime, playing the New England Patriots, getting the win, big win, highs of highs. Then they're looking ahead, possibly for Buffalo, at Buffalo in that spot. And then when you look at both these teams, granted, they haven't played each other since 2020. Miami is 1-3 straight up in the last 4 meetings versus Denver. Miami off a back-to-back, 32%, 32.7% completion rate in this scenario. And then you have the sandwich spot. I think Denver is just hungry. They're hungry for a win. They're playing these like tooth and nail games. You're playing a comparable opponent, maybe an opponent that doesn't really think you're elite enough to play at their level. Maybe play a little bit soft on them. You got them as a big dog. I don't like, Denver's been favored in the last 2 games at -3, -3.5 in these spots. Now you see them as a +6, +6.5 dog. I like the spot here, and I got them at +6.5. That was the number that I got it at. But I see the numbers getting to 6, 5.5s right now. So go and grab those while you can, because I don't think it's going to go back up. Give me Denver on this one, +6.5. That's a 2-unit special.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I mean, I think, again, if you look at the data here, Denver does come into the game 0-2 ATS. But again, I think this is important stuff. We've gone through this. This seems to be the theme of the broadcast. Let's talk about who's hot, who's cold, and the reasoning behind it. As Guns mentioned, both home melts. Tight loss to the Raiders in week 1, had a lead. Even more egregious last week. Big lead in the first half against Washington, and gave it up, honestly, kind of like a college game. You get up big, you give up a ton of points, you come back, Hail Mary, this and that. Truthfully, they probably should have tied the game on that 2-point conversion. There was a blatant holding or pass interference call in the end zone that the refs just somehow missed, and that's NFL football in a nutshell. I can't say I'm remotely enthused by it. They should not be missing obvious calls in game-changing plays. But the environmental analysis that we talked about with Green Bay coming home as a home favorite functioning worse applies to Denver here. They did not function well as a home favorite. Now they are a road dog. So if they were going to improve, it would be in this environment, which is the polar opposite to where they have not performed well ATS. Go to the other side of this game. Miami is a little too hot. Miami did backdoor a real high-scoring game in week 1 at the Chargers, stayed on the road, a game that was a back-and-forth game in primetime against New England, 2 huge wins on the road. You come home, you're laying a big number. I mean, this game is tough for me. There's not a lot of specific matchup data. These teams have never played in the Russell Wilson Tua era, so you're a little bit in the dark there. I'd have to agree with the gun, though. I think the side would be the underdog here. Staying at 1 o'clock, divisional football. Only 2 divisional games this week. A lot of divisional games in week 1 and week 2. We're out of division this week. We're going to get into bye weeks in coming weeks, but really a premier level defensive game expected at MetLife today between the Patriots and the Jets. Patriots obviously come in here off 2 tight losses to playoff caliber teams at home. Now they go on the road to one of the best defenses in the league. Anthony Latino, an official on the under.
Yeah, this is going to be an ugly one. Look, the weather's not great either. I mean, I know the biggest thing you want to watch with weather, it's not always just rain, right? It's heavy rain, it's heavy snow, and it's wind, and that's what's going to affect some of these teams. You're going to get a little bit of all those elements today, which, I think is also pushing this number down. I kind of got the worst of it right now. I saw some 35s. I'm 35.5. I may look to add in-game if there's any spike early on. That's a great live spot. A lot of times these books have to react, and these lines move with some of the totals. Obviously, they're averaging things out, but you can probably get some numbers maybe a little bit closer to that 39, 40, 41 mark, depending on how the game is trending. So look for me on those as well on Twitter during the game. But I'm at 35.5. just for a half unit, see how this thing plays out a little bit. And again, leave some of that room for the live spot. I just think it's going to be a defensive battle. I mean, New England flat out owns the Jets. I think the last win was Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm. Guns knows it well. He's got the jersey on over there. I can see it. It's tough not to back the Pats just because of what Belichick does in terms of owning Zach Wilson. I think that's going to play into what Robert Saleh and the team and the New York Jets do. You have two premier defensive units, especially one coming off a lackluster performance against my Dallas Cowboys. If you don't think the New York Jets, football Jets, are going to be motivated to show out defensively and kind of put up a fight, keep their team in the game against New England, you're absolutely crazy. Then on the other side of the fence, you get Belichick, like I said, has owned the Jets, has owned Robert Saleh, has owned Zach Wilson, top-rated defensive unit, and they're clinging to 0-2. So it's desperation all around. I like the first quarter under. I like the first half under. I like the full game under. I just think this is going to be a messy one, similar to the second game that was played last year that went 10-3. I think the total closed at around 38 or 39. You had a total that closed around 40 earlier in that season, and then they ticked down. They went over. It was 22-17, some late scores, some bombs. Mac Jones got going a little bit more. But I think you're going to see much more like that second matchup last year, 10-3, way under. That number's ticked down even a little bit from where it closed last year, which doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, the gun. Talking about this one, I know we got the jersey on, as I always say. Jersey, background, fandom, everything. And this is a crazy game. I mean, this is a tough game to cap for me. I have some comments. I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, I mean, death taxes and always take the Patriots over the Jets. That's pretty much all you got to do on this one. I mean, I'm not taking it personally on this one. Zach Wilson hasn't done anything to impress me at all. I think he is scared. I think with Bill Belichick, he's going to expose this guy like he's exposed every single Jets quarterback ever. He's going to make this guy see ghosts. And this is a team that is so hungry for a win right now, playing these close games, missing opportunities on fourth down, turnovers on downs in two of those situations. That I'm telling you, this is the time that I just feel like this is going to be a blowout on the New England side. Not going to be taking it personally on this one, but it's always historical. It's the Jets will always lose to the Patriots, in my opinion, and I think it continues today.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not betting this game for one reason. I do believe that line functionality is very specific in pro ball, only in the division. And if you look at that game you guys mentioned last year, 10-3 win for New England in Foxborough, the line was 6.5. This is right around 3. That is that 3 gap from home to road, which generally indicates a push line. As much as I do think New England wins this game, I just think you're really hovering on a field goal spot here. But I think you don't really have a whole lot of access. I do want to talk about the dynamic statistically here. I went through this, and I did mention it when we introed this game. But I think this is very important. New England is 0-2 ATS. But again, detailed analysis, home game against Philadelphia and Miami, 2 playoff teams. That is not the New York Jets with Zach Wilson. And I think the Jets are maybe a bit of fool's gold in their 1-1 ATS. Did get hammered last week at Jerry World, which I think most people expected and we suggested on this broadcast. But you go back to week 1, they are 1-0 at home and 1-0 at home in the division. So you would say, oh, they performed well at home in the division. No, it's even more specific than that. That was the Bills. They own the Bills, and the Patriots own the Jets. This is very much one-sided matchup analysis in the AFC East. I think that's why you're seeing steam. This line did open at Pick'em and got steamed up. I see some 3s popping up now. We would never talk you on the Jets in this matchup. Anthony making some great points. The under, of course, tropical storm in the area, wind and rain. Definitely an afternoon in the New York area. Crack some beers, lay back and relax, and enjoy an under in this game. Staying at 1 o'clock, a lot of 1 o'clock games this week. Throwing it back to the gun.
Just one quick thing on teasers before you go to him. Somebody
Absolutely.
in the chat put teaser leg for the Jets. I don't think that's a bad one. I actually think the one I like better is Denver that we were talking about before, because you're going to cross 7 again. You're going to cross 10. You'll be up around 2 touchdowns. So if I had to pick between the two, Jets not a bad one if you can get over the 7 and be at that 7.5, 8. But I do lean Denver as a stronger teaser leg.
That's a good point. You have to make sure you're getting over at least 2 key numbers if you're taking teasers, really. I mean, if you are I don't personally play teasers a lot, if any, but that's how you do it. You have to get over 2 key numbers.
Yeah, no, I agree. We talk about this occasionally. I don't think taking teasers in NFL is particularly terrible. We don't advise you guys to take adjusted bets or parlays, but the league is so sharp. I don't think you're incorrect adjusting some lines in this league as it stands for itself. And standing for itself, Jacksonville Jaguars at home down in Florida against the Texans. Divisional football here. A lot to unpack. These teams have definitely been a bit inconsistent, I would say confusing against each other. Jacksonville did lose at home to the Texans last year, early season, incomprehensibly, 13-6, just pathetic. Jacksonville coming off of another home loss, very low scoring. Guns picks. You like the road team here to continue road domination in this division?
Yeah, I mean, you just talked about a good point. You say the Jets own Buffalo. Well, if you actually look at the history, it seems like the Texans own the Jaguars, and I'll get to that in a second. But you got the Jags coming off a loss at home, 17-9, and putting up only 271 yards of total offense, minus 123 net yards for the game. Houston coming off back-to-back losses, including a divisional loss to Indianapolis. Indianapolis historically owns Houston. Only lost by 11 despite winning the net yardage in that game, plus 36 net yards for the game. Houston has shown they have a passing game. This CJ Stroud guy is probably looking like the best rookie quarterback right now. I mean, he's actually doing real well. 63.7 pass completion rate, 6.9 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 0 INTs in his first 2 games. He also has some great targets too. The underrated targets: Nico Collins, Tank Dell. Tank Dell was like the top receiver in college football at Houston last season. So getting him was a steal. And then you got Robert Woods. Robert Woods, a veteran that coming over from the Rams. And I think he played for Tennessee too. You got Jaguars giving up a lot in the passing game. That's kind of been they've been kind of Swiss cheese with that. They give up 66.3% pass completion rate, 257 yards per game. That was against Indianapolis with a rookie quarterback, and of course Patrick Mahomes. So those are where those stats are coming from there. When you look at the matchup and the history, like I was just talking about this, Jacksonville is 1-9 straight up versus Houston in the last 10 matchups. Quite remarkable considering Jacksonville really is the team that's on the up and up, and then Houston's always seems like they're always on a rebuild. But when they play Jacksonville, they seem to play their best ball. Last time these two teams met, like Shark just said, 13-6, absolutely gross game. The line was 7 in that one as road dogs. That's what it closed at. Almost identical line to what you saw last season. 7.5s are available on this one. You get it over the key number 7. I don't know if it's going to stay that way or keep dropping. I know it was at a 9 at one point, so it is going in the direction that would lead me to believe it's a Houston number. And then you just have the history on this one. Jacksonville just notoriously slow starters in the season. They were 2-6 straight up last season before they made their push to go be a playoff team. So I'm going to take Houston on this one early in the season against Jags, plus 7.5, 2-unit special.
Yeah, this is a tough game. And as I mentioned, 13-6 at home last year. The Jags did hammer them on the road late season, 31-3. So this is a revenge game for Houston. One comment on this. I don't have a side in this game. I do think this is going to be tight on the number. I do think that Jacksonville could come out here early and get a lead. If you look at what Houston did in week 1 at Baltimore, they did not cover a big spread. They didn't cover last week in the division either. I don't know what to make of this game. One point to Guns' take, which I do think is very viable. As I mentioned with Atlanta, they do travel to London after this game. This is why I said I think Jacksonville might come out early and melt late. They have to travel to London, which is basically their second home field after this game for a big out-of-division matchup. So I don't like this game. I think Guns could get there. I think this could be tight. Anthony, any comments on this one?
No, but I think CJ Stroud just is going to be interesting to watch. He may be the best quarterback in this draft class. You know, so again, I think division matchups always tough, especially with a big number. So I think it'll be a fun one to watch and maybe gauge where both these teams are at.
Yeah, staying at 1 o'clock, we got a couple games here to rip through. I want to talk about the Ravens and the Colts. Very specific stuff here. As I mentioned, Ravens did clean up in week 1 against another rookie quarterback. Of course, this is not a rookie quarterback. Anthony Richardson, concussed, and maybe he will learn very quickly. You are a hell of an athlete, but you are going to get demolished running inside of the tackles in the NFL. And he took some big hits last week while scoring 2 touchdowns early. But Gardner Minshew coming in here on the road, obviously journeyman, very impressive, solid ATS statistics in his career, particularly at home. This is road. This is a tough game. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this. When I looked at this game, I had a couple things written down here. Definitely counterpoints. I'll state them and then I'll throw it to the gun for some comments. Baltimore has performed very well at home historically outside of the division on these big numbers. As I mentioned in week 1 to cover, they don't really blow you out. They just hold you to no points. So I think this game again is going to be one of those games where they could win the game like 27-10 or like 24-9 or just some gross game. The major counterpoint to taking Baltimore is twofold. They are 2-0 ATS, so they're maybe a little too hot. And this is a sandwich game. Huge game last week, huge road win at Cincinnati. Now you get this out of division, I mean, really uninspiring spot, if we're going to be honest, from a psychological perspective. Next week, another road divisional game at Cleveland. So this is the biggest sandwich spot on the entire card from a schedule perspective. You don't love buying Baltimore there. I've seen a lot of sharps on Indianapolis this week. The line is moving up. I'm not entirely sure if that's sharp or public. I could make an argument for either side of this game. This is a tough game. Guns, any comments on this one?
I mean, you got to look at the weather report. I mean, if you want to know what the weather report is for the Baltimore game, I'll go outside and I'll tell you, because I'm 40 minutes away from where the Ravens play at M&T. So it's going to be sloppy. It's going to be wet. I don't know what the winds are going to be. I know the winds have been kind of off and on, at least from my house perspective, but it's going to be a sloppy run type of game. You have Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is just a proven veteran quarterback. He gets the job done. He's efficient. But I kind of look at this like when we saw in week 1 when Houston played in Baltimore. Baltimore's offense was kind of flat. It seemed like unmotivated, uninspired. It didn't really do much. They did win the game. The defense played exceptionally well. But you had to understand that was dealing with a rookie in his first start. Probably the nerve factor was in there before he got comfortable in the next game. But yeah, if I had to lean on this one, I really don't. I don't even have to lean on this one. It's just you know, I could see Baltimore winning 24-3, and I can also see the game being within a touchdown. But yeah, it's a complete pass for me on this one.
Yeah, and I'm just going to wrap this up, and then we'll throw it to Ant for the next game. But you know, I do think that Baltimore does have a bit of that element where they were cold for a long period of time. So now that they're 2-0 ATS, they're not necessarily supposed to dump one. I could see them clustering here and covering. But as we mentioned, they've been very good on this type of number. We just have no idea. So staying in this 1 o'clock slate, this is the last game of the 1 o'clock slate. A lot of intrigue in this game. I don't have an official, but I do have some angles to discuss. Buffalo on the road, outside of the division and the conference at Washington. Washington coming home here off the game we just discussed. A really, really college football style back and forth high scoring win at Denver last week. Buffalo on the road, laying 6.5 points, steam down now. Throw it to Anthony for some opening comments.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not on it. One that I'll look in game, maybe if Buffalo gets down, starts slow. Again, that could be weather with where this game is. So you talked about the weather report. You know, go to Guns, the meteorologist. He's going to be in charge of this one. I'm
about 40 minutes from Landover too, so I'm right in the middle.
He's smack in the middle, right? He's in the DMV, baby. He's right there. So you know, we're going to see where this one lands. But look, if you're going to look at the splits and see where some of the sharp money is and where some of the movement is, it's on the Commanders, which is a little crazy. You know, given where the Raiders, how the Bills performed, especially after going down 7-0 against that Raiders, it was a flat out dominant performance, maybe getting back to the form that they should be in. But I don't think the Raiders are very good. I do think the Commanders, the NFC has outplayed the AFC. If you look at it across the board, the NFC might be better and maybe a little bit deeper than we all thought, where the AFC is actually a little bit more wide open and clustered with some of these teams. So going on the road, it's really a sandwich spot, right? And I think that plus, you know, the weather conditions and being on the road in a different environment is what you have to look at here. That might be why some people are backing or so bullish on the Commanders. The Bills have the Miami Dolphins on tap. And that's maybe what these guys are thinking about if they're not going to be focused. So that's one angle. Maybe Shark, that's what you're going to touch on. I don't know if you have some others.
I definitely think it's a look ahead, no doubt. I don't think it's as bad of a sandwich spot as the Baltimore spot, because that, of course, is sandwiched between divisional opponents. Raiders last week was more so just what Buffalo does. And that is where I'm looking at this game. What does Buffalo do environmentally? Road outside of the division, they're pretty damn good. And they're pretty damn consistent. Very impressive win last year at Baltimore. Very impressive last year at Arrowhead in a win at Kansas City. This team is 3-1-1 road ATS outside the division in their last 5. And that the Baltimore game was a push. The only non-cover, if you guys remember last year, there was a blizzard in Buffalo. and they had to play a game at Detroit where it was actually a home game, and they played Cleveland in Detroit as a home game. So they were just off the grid from any sort of travel, hospitality perspective. They actually played 2 straight games in Ford Field last year. They played a home game in Ford Field against Cleveland, and they stayed in Detroit and played Detroit as a road game. And they did not cover that game, 28-25. But we talked about Detroit before. That's because Detroit is excellent at home. Outside of that total outlier schedule spot, they are 3-0-1 in their last 4 on the road, including a couple NFC matchups late season. If I had to lean here, I would lean Buffalo. The only counterpoint, as you mentioned, look ahead. Not sure how much that really weighs into it, just because, again, I don't know. I just think this is where they function well. Guns, any comments?
Yeah, I don't think that. I agree with you. I don't think at least for Buffalo, it's not a sandwich spot. They already had that punch in the mouth from playing a divisional opponent in the New York Jets, losing in dramatic fashion this one. But you look at Washington. They've played 2 super tight games versus like low level NFL franchises. You're looking at the Cardinals, who considered arguably one of the worst teams in the NFL, and then you got Washington going on the road, going to go play Denver. Almost blowing it with that Hail Mary, like I said before. So, I mean, they played super tight. And then I just think that, this is probably more of a Buffalo side than anything else on this one. Nothing I'm going to be personally taking myself, but I could see Buffalo coming in here and really punching them in the mouth and getting an easy victory.
Yeah, moving into the 4 o'clocks here, 51 minutes in. We got one top official. I will drop it in a minute. I'm excited for it, but let's talk about the other games first. 4 o'clock. 4:05 kick, the only one on the card here. Panthers at Seahawks. Really rough stuff here today. I don't know what to make of this game. Seattle's actually having a 10-year anniversary Super Bowl celebration, either pregame or at halftime. I think pregame would probably be more leaning towards a cover, get it out of the way. Pretty sure that's what they're doing. Halftime would be potentially a massive distraction. Of course, Bobby Wagner still up there, was on that team. He will be involved with that. Carolina comes on the road here with Andy Dalton at quarterback. So this just takes on such an unknown. I don't want to talk about this game for too long. I'll throw it to Ant for some comments.
Yeah, I just think you have a similar element with the Gardner Minshew, Colts-led team, right? It's interesting. These guys are not bad backups. They've been around the NFL. They're not great quarterbacks either. But I think it just changes the dynamic a lot, and it's tough to back. The one thing I did see earlier, we're trying to share things on Twitter. We're trying to get you guys in the chat, so keep interacting. We appreciate it. But, per the DraftKings sportsbook, the list of 70% plus on a team per DraftKings, again, so this is just one slice of data. The highest team percentage-wise is 86% is on Seahawks minus 4.5. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but, just interesting, right? Obviously, I think you're going to get the same thing with that Colts-Ravens game. They're up there on that list as well, but 86% on the Seahawks minus 4.5. That line is moving down. So,
yeah. And I'll throw it to the gun in a second, but I think that's incredible stuff. When you see Andy Dalton coming in here, huge moment for Seattle. Seattle off a huge win on the road at Detroit, and 86% of the money, and it's moving against. Somebody knows something here in this game, and we're probably looking at a field goal outcome here. Guns, any comments on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the injury report here for the depth chart on Seattle. I mean, you have quite DK Metcalf's questionable. They obviously have injury issues with the offensive line, and also, funny enough, they have a lot of guys that are hurt in the secondary for Seattle. I mean, you have Jamal Adams, he's questionable. Condre Diggs, he's questionable. Woolen, he's probably going to be out. Jaron Reed, the nose tackle, he's hurt. So there's a lot of injury issues with this one. And then you have the fact that you have a veteran quarterback for a team playing a lot of close games. You never know what you're going to get out of Andy Dalton. You're either going to get good Andy Dalton or you're going to get bad Andy Dalton. But there's no way of telling what's going to be on this one. It's a complete pass for me, but I think it's going to be a very public side to be taken Seattle. So take that for what it's worth, but no play for me.
Yeah, throwing it right back to you. We're going to talk about this one very briefly. 4:25 p.m. Arrowhead. Bears on the road. Taking a breath. The Bears have been an absolute disaster. There's no way around it. I think the coach has potentially lost the group. I think the scheme is wrong. I think Justin Fields is overthinking every play. I think it's just an absolute grease fire. But They get a big line at Kansas City. And Kansas City has been awful covering these big spreads at home against opponents, particularly outside of their conference. Guns, any comments on this one?
The biggest problem of all, FBI raiding the defensive coordinator's house. Peanut Tillman is an FBI agent now. I mean, this is some crazy stuff. There's so many distractions going on with Chicago, not only with the offense, Justin Fields, just not comfortable. It feels robotic, feels stiff. He's having issues. There's friction there. I mean, this team is in shambles altogether, and the line's really telling that one. With Kansas City, I always hate playing them at home, especially as double-digit favorites, because they just don't play their best ball at home. They play to the level of their competition, and a lot of teams are just up to play the Super Bowl champions every time they play them. And I mean, knowing where Chicago's at, this is not the time to be going and fading Kansas City at home right now. I don't know what this line's telling me. I don't know what's going on in Chicago. I just want to wait and see. It is an absolute disaster for the Bears. I have no play on this one whatsoever.
The one thing you got to watch, I'm not a huge trend guy. I like to look at it, but Mahomes 7-13-1 against the spread as a double-digit favorite. So obviously that's Mahomes and Andy Reid in this era. We saw it in years past. I think there was one season, it was either last year or 2 years ago, where they just couldn't cover any spread. But 7-13-1 against the spread as a double-digit favorite, which is what you get today.
Yeah, and I think, as much as people might hate it, I think Chicago is probably the side in this game.
Yeah. So gross, though. So gross.
Sometimes that's the best. Sometimes that's the best.
So gross.
You're not getting gross enough.
I bet Kelly in Vegas is on the Bears today.
Oh, come on. Oh, contrarians everywhere, man. You're jumping on the Bears.
Well, jumping to the big time play at 425 on a suddenly not so casual 7-point Sunday, September 24, 2023. Buy hat is engaged from our guy, the odds fellow. Double down on the hats. I love it. Dallas Cowboys -12, 1 unit official. A lot going on here, gentlemen. Let's talk about it. This is a very specific fade of Arizona. Guns mentioned it. Arizona projected to be one of the worst teams in the sport. Arizona is 2-0 ATS. And they're 2-0 ATS against the NFC East, which is supposed to be one of the most, if not the most difficult and deep divisions in the sport. But go through it. Both were very situational. Week 1 at Washington, 20-16 loss, cover, +7. Washington in the first half. Sam Howell, first Week 1 start of his career. Interception on their first possession at their own 25. Gift wrapped some points to Arizona. Washington, drive down to the Arizona 19. Red zone fumble. Slightly later on, still first half. Fumble at their own 26-yard line. Return for a touchdown for Arizona. Moral of the story, Washington gave them that game. Arizona did not do anything. Those were just bizarre clustered turnovers. Go back to last week. Giants come out on the road down 20-0 in the first half. But you look at the Giants, lost to the Cowboys in Week 1, had a road back-to-back sequence on the West Coast. Look ahead before they played San Francisco on Thursday Night Football. We talk about sandwich spots. That was a sandwich spot for the Giants. I capped it incorrectly last week. We'll sit here and own it, but it was a bad spot for the Giants. It wasn't so much Arizona being great. Now, they're 2-0 against this division. They got to play 3 straight against the NFC East. Who knows where that scheduling comes from? It doesn't get any easier. In fact, it gets much, much worse. Dallas might be the best team in the NFC right now. -12, a big-time line. I think that Arizona is capped. I think they left it all on the table last week in the first half. They got outscored huge to get backdoored. We talk about this all the time. Guns was talking about it before the broadcast in terms of the Notre Dame melt yesterday. We talk about this when you come off of a late melt. You're not angry and inspired. You're deflated in the next game. And I think Arizona has really, really overexerted themselves in terms of physicality and, more importantly, ATS efficiency in the first 2 weeks. Final point, we talk about look-aheads. This has some significance. Arizona does have their in-division opener next week at San Francisco. This is a brutal spot. This is the historical big lines that cover. We talk about this all the time. There's not a lot of parity in NFL. When you see a line at 12, 13, or 14, it's a blowout line. It is historically very efficient. They covered it last week. I don't think there'd be any problem covering it this week. -12, 1 unit. Official, Anthony, the hat's on. The fandom is engaged. Talk to me.
This game actually might be on national television. I have to see if they're featuring the Chiefs and the Bears in that 425 spot, because it's a weird 9 games at 1 o'clock, 3 here. But I think it's a good spot for the Cowboys. This to me, if they get this right and cover this spread, especially after the Diggs injury coming together a little bit, I think that's actually a highly motivating spot for them. But it'll show a lot of what this team is really made of, because historically, Mike McCarthy and even some of the previous regimes, this team would come out flat in this spot. I don't think it's the same Dallas Cowboys, so I think it should be pretty telling. Let's get this offense. Let's get Dak going on his MVP campaign.
Yeah, Guns, comments on this game. You mentioned it, and I want to throw it to you on this comment specifically. When Diggs is out and there's another crucial injury and the line's actually coming up in the market, sharp stuff.
Yeah. That's a telltale sign. When you lose your top corner and the line doesn't move, or actually moves in the other direction. I saw 13s this morning. I see it at 12.5, 12s now. So it's kind of bouncing back and forth. It's not necessarily any sharp movement, or it's just people buying numbers off and on. I mean, this is, to me, Shark made great points on this one. Arizona's close gameness is a little bit deceiving when you actually break down the box scores on this one. And Dallas is just playing absolutely electric. That defense is explosive. It's hard to run on them. It's hard to pass on them. And of course, you got the offense that's really clicking on all cylinders on this one. It's a Dallas player pass on this one. Eventually Atlanta, the cheese is going to fall off the cracker, as they say. And it's probably going to be in this game here. So Dallas or pass.
And final point coming into week 3, underdogs with 7+ points or more. So think about this for Survivor, teasers, some of those things, contests, right? 7+ points. We're 0-5 straight up coming in, but those teams are losing by an average of 15 points per game. So that's obviously the straight up breakdown. I would imagine if you looked at an ATS, it's probably pretty ugly. One of them coming in this week, because you had a couple big week 3 underdogs, was the Giants. They didn't cover. So that number is now 0-6 straight up, and at least an 0-1 against the spread there. You have the 9.5 points roughly for the Colts. You got the Bears, you got the Texans and the Cardinals. So a lot of big numbers that are going to be over those 7+ points. So something to watch today.
Yeah, and Arizona at 2-0 ATS is just a great fade spot.
Yeah.
8 o'clock p.m. Steelers Raiders. I want to be quick with this one, and we'll go to Monday Night Football because the Guns does have an official. This is a tough game. This is probably another push line. We talked about New England at -3, a push line. I think this is probably a push, and I think the Raiders and Steelers are very evenly matched. Last year, late season, they did play to, probably not coincidentally, a 3-point outcome in Pittsburgh, 13-10. You get a revenge game for the Raiders, which obviously does have some merit. The Raiders will be turned up. I don't think anybody really has a good handle on Kenny Pickett and these boys just yet. Obviously, we're terrible at home outside of the division. Weren't that much better last week, as we discussed. 2 defensive touchdowns won that game. It was not the offense. If I had to lean this game, I would lean towards the Raiders, but I do fear this line is incredibly sharp. Anthony, some comments?
I actually lean Pittsburgh a little bit, just because I think the defense is so good. But it's an interesting line, right? Which to me is kind of keeping me off of it, because I'd much prefer if they were going on the road and being favored here, especially coming off a win and a strong defensive performance. So the line a little bit telling something. I'm going to look in game to see how this thing starts.
Yeah, Guns?
Yeah, I lean Pittsburgh on this one too. I'm not sold the Raiders at all. I kind of saw them last week versus Buffalo. I don't think this is a good team at all. I don't think they've made a dramatic change going with Jimmy G over Derek Carr at all. I think it's linear at best. And then you just have the Pittsburgh defense just playing out of their minds. They're carrying this team on their back because that offense ain't doing anything. They need to fire Matt Canada altogether because he is not helping this team at all. The progression of Kenny Pickett, who is an exceptional talent, but you're unable to see it right now because the offense is not working with him. So yeah, this is a Pittsburgh play as long as TJ Watt is playing. I'm going to be taking Pittsburgh as a dog as much as possible, but I'm a little bit scared of that offense. They're just not good at all.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I think this is probably for me a push line, and I think neither of us. I think any of us have a great angle on this game. But one final play on the broadcast. We do have a great angle on this. Monday, September 25th, it will be. Mondays are for momentum. And the gun has an official. Bird Gang on the road, ESPN 7:15 in Tampa, taking the home team at +5 official.
The pirate ship is getting disrespected, and Baker Mayfield is getting disrespected with this line. This is a pretty decent Tampa team statistically, and they're not getting the numbers to prove it. And I think it's more public perception than anything. But when you look at Philly, I mean, NFC champs, they're 2-0 this season, coming off a Thursday night football win, 34-28 to Minnesota, plus 56 net yards for the game, plus 6-point differential overall this season. But they only have a minus 38 net yard average. I mean, this is not a team that is really blowing you out like they used to last year. But Tampa's 2-0 as well. They're coming off a strong win versus Chicago, 27-17, dominating the net yardage in that one, plus 201 in that game. What Philly does is they have trouble with pass rushes. That's kind of been their issue this season. They've already given up 7 sacks this season for a 12.5% sack rate. So if you can get to the quarterback, you have a good pass rush, you are a problem for the Eagles here. And Tampa, guess what? Has a great pass rush. 8 sacks in 2 games, 11% sack rate. They also have been great at getting to the turnovers. They've been really good ball hawks. +3 turnover ratio average for this team defensively. Tampa Bay's O-line's also been pretty solid, really protecting Baker Mayfield so far this season, only giving up 1 sack so far, 1.5% sack rate. So they can actually block this season for Baker Mayfield. And you look at Philly's defense, absolutely gashed in the passing game. That's been their problem. Giving up over 300 yards passing to both of their opponents, which would be Kirk Cousins and then Mac Jones, who isn't a great passer himself, but he had over 300 versus Philly. But you look at Tampa, Baker Mayfield, whatever you want to say about him, how bad of a quarterback he is, he's playing really well with Tampa. Right team, right place, right time. And I think it is Baker Mayfield's time. 69.1% pass completion rate, 7.2 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, 0 INTs for Baker Mayfield. And then the offense tends to be better when they play better when they face Philly. Philly is ranked 25th in the NFL at opponent when it comes to opponents' offensive yard season average. When you play them, you get +50 above your season average as far as your yardage is concerned. Where Tampa's ranked 9th, holding opponents to 40 yards under their season average. Also, you got to look at Tampa, 3-1 against the spread versus Philly, 4-0 straight up, dating back to 2015. So I think this is going to be a perfect spot to take the +5 for Tampa on this one, Monday Night Football style. And I think the public perception is everybody still loves the Eagles. So I'm just taking advantage of egregious lines, in my opinion, and picking the wrong team. So I like Tampa on this one, +5, 2-unit special.
Anthony, any comments on this one?
No, I can't wait for Monday Night Football. I'm glad I like the double headers, so I hope they keep that going.
Yeah, I agree. My only comment on this, I have no disagreement. I do fear this is another tight line, and I'm only saying this because of just historical data for Philadelphia. If you go through their road games in the last couple years, it's just crazy tight. Go back to last year at Chicago, 25-20, right on the number, non-cover. Go back to a game at Indy, non-cover, tight. At Houston, 29-17, 11.5, almost a push. At Arizona, -4.5, 3-point win. At Detroit, 4.5, 3-point win. And, of course, earlier this year on the road at New England, 5-point win on a 4.5. Guns is on the right side. Philadelphia does not perform great as a road favorite outside of the division. They're much better inside of the division. I do think this could be sharp, however. Sharp stuff here on a beautiful Sunday morning leading up to high noon here. Sharky Waters Nation, Twitter, X, and YouTube. We appreciate you guys on both platforms. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We can talk to you. The chat is available for us on YouTube only. And of course, Twitter, X is messing around with their new chat anyway. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that. Tons of top plays, an opportunity to dominate. 4 top plays from myself. Cleveland -3, Detroit -3, Chargers +1.5, Dallas at 425 -12. Odds fell alignment on Cleveland -2.5 first half, game -3. Atlanta +3. I didn't mention this on the broadcast, but he missed it. He is on Green Bay -1 and the under in MetLife Stadium in the tropical storm, 35.5. Guns picks, 6 top plays. A big, big card for the gun. Minnesota -1, Atlanta +3, New Orleans on the road +2, Denver plus 6.5, Houston plus 7.5, Tampa Bay plus 5. Lots of dogs there. Beautiful show, beautiful time. Sending you guys all the top energy. Let's dominate this Sunday. Well, we will have some conversation tomorrow about Monday Night Football. The Gun obviously has one pick. Appreciate you guys beyond words. Guns picks, close them out with some words, and let's dominate.
Yeah, make sure all you guys that have been watching us live, whether it be here or Twitter, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Sharky Waters Nation channel. And hit the notification bell so you know every time that we go live. Listen, we bring the college football show, we have the NFL show, and we also have Saturday mornings with Guns Picks, which was absolute success last week. Actually, last week. Ooh, I gotta wake up. All right, so that's gonna do it for the show. Let's cash some tickets, everybody. And as always, let's keep dancing. Bang.